everybody. This is Dr. Craig with AI, and I'm delighted to have Dr. Michael Harvey here with me all the way from Australia as a Kiwi on holiday. Good to talk to you, Michael.
Yes, kia ora from the sunny Gold Coast.
Great to see you again. We first connected during COVID when we were doing all sorts of Google Education Group meetings, and you shared about the Merge Cube.
Yes, I did. Yes, COVID times, they were I thought it would lead to a sea change in education. It hasn't quite happened, the evolution as opposed to revolution, but I wait and hope.
Me too. And I'd love to hear your views about AI, but first, for those who don't know your awesomeness, how about you share about your journey to discovering AI? Give us the origin story of Dr. Michael.
Well, there is a Māori whakatauki as the kumara never says how sweet he is, so I won't go into the depths of how awesome I am. But in terms of my discovering AI, well, I kind of keep my ear to the ground in terms of big technological changes. So artificial intelligence, when it came, but especially the generative AI, which has really kicked off in the last year or so.
Right.
I was one of the early adopters in New Zealand, especially around the use of Microsoft tools because I'm an EIE fellow. So I was quick to get on board initially as a way to save time, but I've kind of over this year and a half my ideas have become more nuanced around the use of generative AI in the classroom and also for teachers.
And so that issue of saving time for you, you've moved on a bit from that, or it's developed from that. What would you say to teachers who have that messaging about it saves time using AI for, because there's productivity tools and then there's those curriculum-driven pedagogical platforms, and using either one can save you time. What would you say to people who use that argument around it saves time?
Well, I would use the argument that all the previous tools that we've used in education, remember the videos of the 80s and 90s, the calculator, even the humble book from the 18th century, they're all transactional tools. So the idea that you basically put something in and you get something back. Whereas I think with generative AI, it's a completely different model in terms of a tool. It's not transactional, though you can use it very basically as a transactional tool, but that's what we have search engines for. I see it more as a relational tool, and it's the real power of generative AI that is in that relational tool aspect.
Tell me more.
Yeah, so in terms of the way I'm now looking at artificial intelligence is not necessarily through a Western capitalist lens, which was my original approach with working with edtech companies, but now being from New Zealand, looking at it from more an indigenous view. So time in the Western construct is something that can be commodified, it's linear, whereas time in a Te Ao Māori perspective is circular, it comes back. And it's all about the relationships that we utilize in that time space that are more important than a time itself. So I think that's where the actual power of generative AI is, seeing it as a relationship builder and actually having a relationship, at least in a professional sense, with the artificial intelligence.
Okay, so individual students using the AI as a tool to build a relationship between people, or between the AI itself and people, or both, or what?
Both. So, for example, in global collaborations, which I'm heavily involved in, one of the reasons we're having this conversation is because of Cami in Canada. I'm actually having a conversation with today about her work today in Chicago with a Google symposium. It's really about the idea of building the relationships in terms of the administration tasks that the AI can do that. So the actual getting the times to collaborate in terms of time, because a major issue I had with working with her in ISTE was working out the times for all the talks and developing the website around that. And that was really challenging. So that's one thing it can do. But I think more importantly, it creates a mentor for teachers and for students. So I think of my life now, when I'm walking to school, I've got about a 15-minute walk. I actually have ChatGPT OpenAI just with the speech to text, and I'm actually having conversations with the artificial intelligence about what I could try this today in my lessons. So it's more a relationship and using it as a relational tool rather than just saying, I will do this in my lesson. What's the best way of doing it? Actually having that back to forth conversation with the artificial intelligence.
Do you find the ideas that it's giving you are based possibly on previous lessons which still have that Western colonialist mindset? Or is it learning to generate ideas which are more in line with the kaupapa that you have at your school or in your classroom?
Oh, well, that's the advantage of having the difference between large language models, which are essentially dominated by the US. And I also use now with ChatGPT small language models. So I've actually downloaded all my notes from 10 years of teaching from New Zealand and overseas, and also integrating different te ao. Like, for example, in my particular region, we have a document that we've been co-created with the iwi, the 11 iwi in the region. So that's now placed into my small language model. So then that can be incorporated in my conversations as well.
So you've made your own GPT.
Yeah, made my own bespoke GPTs.
Fantastic. Fantastic. As you're thinking about how AI could be moving forward,
Yeah.
particularly in schools, and I know that we have this hesitancy that when we start freeing up teachers' time because they're using AI to get some more administrative stuff done, some more work may come down the pipeline. Where do you see as well as what you've just described, where do you see as some other opportunities for real impact in terms of equity?
Yeah, equity is an interesting conversation because the reason I'm in Brisbane actually is because I've just gone to an AI in education conference, but it was for private schools. And it was very interesting, their conversations. Their conversations were primarily focused around assessment and making sure the students aren't cheating, as it were. So there was no discussion around using it in a transformative way. It was about how can we catch them cheating. So that was quite an interesting insight. Whereas also one other hat that I wear as being a union leader here in New Zealand is that I have conversations with schools where, for example, in the East Coast of the North Island where I'm from, there's one particular school that has 10 Chromebooks. That's all they have. So yeah, exactly. Wow. So the idea of digital equity is just kind of mind-blowing. I've worked a lot with Tim Gander and his research with B. Clark. And one of the things that he's looked at is teacher voice. And a lot of the, I guess, poorer regions of New Zealand are just saying, well, artificial intelligence isn't our problem. It's a rich schools problem. So they're not even acknowledging potentially that artificial intelligence can drive equity. So that's definitely something that is quite concerning. I also look at the PD opportunities, especially in New Zealand, around artificial intelligence. They're asking for $700 for a 6-hour session. There's no way a state school can afford that. So it's kind of developing that digital inequity through lack of knowledge as well from educators. Yes, I could talk a lot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you agree that AI is our really big equity opportunity for this decade at least?
Indeed, because I look at especially my students that have low reading age. The school I'm at, we have a number of students who are basically 14, 15-year-old with reading ages of 8-year-olds. So actually having the artificial intelligence being able to deconstruct the language and being able to present it in easier terms, it just makes it so more effective for their learning. Like having a giant PDF document and being able to deconstruct it into a simple language so they can actually access the information. That's a great leveler. But it's
Great.
about getting those tools out.
Have you seen internationally in your travels and conversations some really great examples, relational use, improving equity access, removing barriers?
Yeah, well, I guess Singapore, they are really moving forward with their model of education around integrating artificial intelligence. And now it pains me as a New Zealander, the kind of educational frameworks that Victoria and New South Wales, the states in Australia are doing, are kind of really at the forefront. And another country that's really pushing it is South Korea in terms of their artificial intelligence use. So those particular countries are really moving forward.
Michael, just to wrap up, if there was a group of school leaders from New Zealand who were here sitting there in a symposium or really open to feedback about taking their first steps with AI, maybe they're willing to make a smaller investment, a few $1,000s if needed, whether that's devices or licenses or whatever, and time and training, what would you encourage them to do? What might be the first steps?
I would probably ask them the why.
Mm,
Because another aspect, especially in the New Zealand context, is that we have Te Tiriti Te Waitangi. And a part of that is three principles: partnership, protection, oh dear, I'm showing it, and participation. Yeah,
participation.
yeah. So those are the three concepts. And at the moment, I'm working with a group of educators to try and incorporate those kind of those values within artificial intelligence within the New Zealand context. So having Māori voices, and also being able to protect it, because under Article 2 of the treaty, knowledge is a taonga, a treasure, so it needs to be protected. And so actually having those small language models.
Mm,
It also gets a bit complex as well, because in tikanga Māori, you've got different levels of knowledge depending on who you are. So there'd be a large number of small language models in that regard. But in order to, I think in New Zealand context, the advantage of that also, it also kind of protects New Zealand identity and kind of brand New Zealand in that sense. Because one thing I did learn, for example, from the generative art models, if you type in create an image of a Māori, most of that training data actually comes from Brazil, because the word for traditional tattooing in Brazil is Māori.
wow.
And so if you type those prompts in, you get very Mesoamerican images, because the training model is actually basing it around Brazilian tattoo artwork. So
Wow.
actually, yeah, just learned that in the last week. So yeah, having those indigenous voices, different worldviews, different ways of approaching problems, I think is critical moving forward in terms of generative AI use.
Yeah, that's really good. I was wondering why, when my youngest daughter and I were searching for Maori warrior, we ended
Mm.
up getting Aztec-looking people or Native American, Native. What's the term in America? Not Native Indian anymore. What is it? Indigenous? No,
Indigenous,
First Nations.
yeah, First
First
Nation
Nations.
people.
First
Yeah,
Nations people were coming up with pictures like that, and I
and
thought,
that's the reason.
come on, we were on the map.
Yeah.
Hey, Dr. Michael, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you giving us your time. And what's the best way for schools and educators and leaders to reach out to you?
Probably LinkedIn is probably the best way. Just search for Michael Harvey and you should find me. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay.